Today, I'm welcoming Dr. Tracy Sidesinger, who is a psychoanalytic psychologist in New York, where she integrates Jungian and relational approaches to address transgenerational aspects of the lost feminine. Her interests span across maternal subjectivity, traumatic memory, and community psychoanalysis. She regularly hosts expressive writing retreats for women that bridge psychoanalytic exploration with writerly craft to facilitate personal transformation outside the consulting room. And she can be followed on Instagram at NYC Depth Psychologist. So welcome, Tracy, to Psychoanalysis You. And I wanted to start today by setting the stage. Hopefully, you could elaborate on what maternal subjectivity means for the day-to-day mom, and why being a psychoanalyst helps women to understand the importance of this concept of maternal subjectivity.
Yes, thank you so much, Gail. I'm really happy to be here. And that's a great place to start with maternal subjectivity. The term itself can sound a little big and complex, but it's not complex at all. What it really means is that mothers, even when people become mothers, remain subjects themselves. They go on being with their own identity, even though they also go through a transformation, the process of matrescence, so many transformations at once, which we can get into what matrescence means later. And of course, they're tasked with this huge responsibility of caring for a child. And so much of psychological history, social history, psychoanalysis has really, in mother-child relations, has emphasized the child. So maternal subjectivity means, of course, we never ignore the needs of the child, but that really these go hand in hand, that when there's a child, even in infancy, there's also the intersubjectivity in relation to the mother and how the mother goes on being.
So I think we spend probably most of our time societally talking about objectivity of mothers, right? Of you have a role. How do you fill that role? Are you struggling with that role? How do we see you from the outside? Are you doing well by whatever our standards are? But you're really calling attention to the importance of that internal experience and how that internal experience is shaped by past experiences as a psychoanalyst, I guess, right? So that's what we often do, and how much that matters then, not only to the mother, but to the mother-child relationship.
Absolutely. It's a really interesting distinction because when we talk about objectivity, it's so much role-based and function-based. And the subjectivity brings back the personhood of every individual who's involved. And you're absolutely right. This is where psychoanalysis really has so much to offer in thinking about maternal subjectivity and the integrated roles between the mother and anyone that she's related to. Because, of course, we know that the attachment, the system that's functioning in a mother at a time that she becomes a mother, it's still there, right? We know this in developmental psychology and psychoanalysis that informs so much unconsciously of how a person operates, what they carry with them attachment wise. But we have research that says how a mother is able to reflect on her own attachment and her own experiences. That impacts how she's able to think about the needs and the experiences of the child that's in her care. It's false to want everyone to be free from attachment difficulties or from traumatic histories. But one of the things that's really significant in how a person is able to give care to dependent children is their ability to reflect and to see the distinction between their own experiences and the experiences of the child in front of them.
Well, that sort of leads to the next subject that you specialize in, or spend a lot of time thinking about as a psychoanalyst, and one that I think we don't talk enough about, and that is the topic of maternal ambivalence, that mothers have both positive and negative feelings about their child and about being a mother. And that doesn't always line up, again, with societal views that being a mother should be a purely joyful all happy. And if you're not, what kind of mother are you anyway? Which induces a lot of guilt and makes it very difficult for mothers to even be aware of their own ambivalence or feel that there's anything normal about that. So, can you talk about the importance of understanding maternal ambivalence? And also, as a psychoanalyst, how you find that knowledge important in caring for mothers, particularly who comes to see you, but probably mothers who are struggling with some of these sorts of feelings.
Right. And I heard many different questions in there, but I'll start with, what does maternal ambivalence mean? You kind of pointed to two different things. And the first that we might think of as different feelings towards the child. So there's a beautiful book from Rosica Parker called Torn in Two, where she really talks about this maternal ambivalence as different conflicting feelings toward the child. Love and hate, those two dimensions of that. And we know as psychoanalysts that ambivalence doesn't mean not knowing what you feel exactly, as feeling multiple things at once in conflict and in tension with each other. And of course, conflict is not bad inherently. One of the beautiful things about conflict and ambivalence is that it is a space to do that work of reflection and thinking. Because if one could imagine a pretend world in which one only ever felt good feelings towards their child, they wouldn't have conflict. They wouldn't have reason to think about anything else. And if you could even feel that way for a day inside the confines of your own home, which really people can't, that doesn't track with what's happening outside the walls of any person's home. And so conflict, I can't stress that enough, that ambivalence and conflict are friends and are useful in that work of reflection to be able to do mindful caregiving work. But that's the place to start with. What does maternal ambivalence mean? First of all, is feelings that are in conflict with each other, feelings of tremendous love, oftentimes, and joy and bliss. These things are there, and the hormonal experiences, the emotional release when you hold a baby, when you see a baby, even if it's not your own, we're not undermining any of that because it's joyful, it's amazing, it's there. And even in the same person, there are feelings of hate, of envy, of an overwhelm, of being touched out, of this is too much, I don't know what to do with you, you remind me of this, and not having words for that. So that's one of the places that we can start with ambivalence. But of course, it means many other things too. Like you also mentioned already, maternal ambivalence can be not knowing if one wants to become a mother before there even is the presence of a real child. And of course, we have so many very relevant political conversations around access to abortion and reproductive options, which is in this space of maternal ambivalence and the need for ambivalence around choice. But I think that also goes into something that I want to talk about later, which is, who is the mother? Who is the caregiver? Who are the people in the caregiving system? And when we don't have ambivalence or conflict, that's also what creates this world of there's only the mother and child, and all caregiving falls to the mother. All identity of the mother becomes mother. There's a real collapse of complexity. And so I think that a third thing I want to elaborate on that maternal ambivalence means is ambivalence about who is involved in the caregiving system and the identity of the mother, if that makes sense.
So, in other words, the idea that if other people are helping with caregiving, which one could argue might be necessary for the mental health and well-being of the mother, if other people are involved, a partner, a grandparent, whoever it might be, that it does not detract from the functionality of the mother. It does not detract from her being able to own the role of mother.
Yes, I think that's absolutely one way to put it. And I would add to that, even if it's not a matter of support, who's helping with the caregiving, that there is necessarily a bigger picture around the mother-baby dyad than the dyad. even if it's not support, that we have to take into account what are the other relationships, both in family dynamics, whether that's a partner, siblings of the child, but also siblings of the mother, parents of the mother, and healthcare system and social systems and policies. These things are all factors in the mother's ability to caregive, especially if they're not supportive, but including if they're supportive.
Before we leave this topic of maternal ambivalence, at least in my practice and as I've moved along, and this is a topic I often talked about, women who present symptomatically very disturbed and distraught about occasional thoughts they have or fantasies they have about leaving their baby on the side of the road or dropping their baby over a balcony or doing something to their baby, which horrifies them and distresses them and leaves them feeling guilty or there's something that's terribly wrong with them. Could they ever do such a thing? How can we understand the way in which ambivalence, not understood, can lead to symptoms that really distress mothers?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's really a great question. I have another colleague, Brooke Lawfer, who has a book that's just come out about mothers who have committed infanticide and thinking about this, of course, in terms of those horrific experiences and those families who have to deal with that, but also in the cultural landscape of these are individual people who are acting as funnels who have collected a lot of the residue, the unwanted residue from culture of the feelings of overwhelm, the feelings of hate, the feelings that it's not possible for the child and the mother to exist side by side, that everyone has to some degree, but that gets repudiated, that gets pushed away, that gets denied. And that actually the fact that these horrific acts of infanticide happen at all is partly a result of the culture's repudiation of maternal ambivalence. And so having spaces, therapeutic spaces where we support mothers to come in all of their feelings, come virtually, come on Zoom, come with your baby, come without your baby, come when you don't know if you want to have a baby. Like there are plenty of resources and therapists who want to see mothers and are available and understanding. We're here.
So I do want to just make clear to listeners that infanticide is an incredibly rare event, incredibly rare. And, often in a situation where there is a tremendous psychiatric illness going on. But that maternal ambivalence is ubiquitous. But that for some women, that ambivalence can cause symptoms, not symptoms where they're actually going to harm their baby, not that level of symptom, but just walking around feeling guilty or wrong or bad in some way that robs them of a lot of the pleasure of the early mothering experience.
Absolutely. Thank you for that clarification. And I think it's something that is really difficult to talk about because when it comes to postpartum psychosis and things that are really serious and need immediate attention, they get a response of we need this to have immediate attention. They can sometimes overwhelm the conversation and shut down these other experiences of if ambivalence happens for every single mother, it does not look like psychosis for every single mother. In fact, that is very rare. A small percentage, 3, 4, 5% at most. I really, really think that's an important distinction. And yet it's something that needs said because it's almost the fear that it brings up is part of the shutdown of, oh, I guess we can't talk about it, when in fact, it actually needs to be the other way around. That the more we talk about all of the ways that ambivalence shows up, in the wondering if your baby's going to fall out the window or wanting to push your baby out the window, that all of these things do need talked about and they show up.
Most women are tremendously relieved to hear that other women have other wonderful mothers have those thoughts. And that doesn't mean that they're a bad mother or there's something wrong with them. And just as we always see in psychoanalytic treatments, just making that unconscious thought conscious, as well as understanding what the thought means, provides a lot of relief in and of itself. And so I know that you run writing retreats. And so, I'm alluding to being in treatment can really be helpful in this regard. But do you find that your writing workshops, women being able to write about such thoughts or how they feel about the thoughts, is also relieving for them?
Oh, absolutely. And of course, they're very different things, being in individual treatment, sometimes with a good frequency, multiple times a week or even once a week, but with a consistency over time is a very different thing than being in a short but intensive workshop. But yes, one of the things that I found from running these workshops is they're usually 3 days with a small group of other women who are wanting to work with some similar themes, that they both have the opportunity to have the experience of others who can listen and hold some of what they're going through, and also have solidarity that your experience is not singular, you're not alone. That's very important, as you say. But also doing the writing work when they know that there's a holding container does allow them to go into what is singular and to do that deep work of reflecting, oftentimes on intergenerational things, what their relationships are like with their own mothers, grandmothers, as well as with their children or their desire to or to not become a mother. And those are deeply personal processes. And I've found that when people can do the work for hours at a time in a boundaried but really intensive way, that a lot of pieces get put together in a way that sometimes can't happen in the 45 minutes, even if it's recurring and frequent in psychoanalytic meetings.
So let's turn to the topic of choice, which is something else that you cover, I'm sure, in your workshops, in your writing workshops, as well as in your office. Choice for women, free. Do women have choice? And how does one have choice when there is so much that is, we've been talking about, unconscious, out of awareness? And without choice, how prepared can women be for a path of motherhood?
Mm-hmm. Yes. And I think this is a perennial conundrum, as it were. I mean, we all know women, many of us have been there, who are not, quote, ready to have a child, which assumes that there's some day where they will be ready. And you see people push this day off and push this day off, sometimes in the sense that when they realize they will never feel ready. And I think a lot of that is because there are always unconscious forces at work that mean choice is never fully free, even if we have a political landscape that is supportive of personal choice and agency. And if we analytically are working towards that with our patients. And there's this, again, conflict of creating the space to have as much agency and reflection as possible, but knowing that things do arise, especially because parenting is an intersubjective experience. There will always be surprises, whether that's in what happens in pregnancy or labor and delivery, or who the child is as an individual at any stage of their development. It's also a fantasy to want to be prepared for everything that will happen, because that takes away the subjectivity of the child and of the world around you. And of course, what that means also is that we have really devastating things that people have to deal with as parents. The loss of a home in the middle of fires, war, and insecurity on a very fundamental level, being some of them that frankly across the world are not uncommon. And then there are so many different ways that even among people who have racial, financial privilege in America, the fact is birth and death are two of the great mysteries that we can never solve. And as much science, as much research as we put into birth and pregnancy, and we need to do more of that, it will always remain a mystery that can't be solved. And in that way, I think the goal in the people that I work with and what I would want to communicate to people who want to become mothers is that you do as much of the reflection as you can on understanding what are the experiences in life that have shaped you, and to be present in the moment, to think about what's happening, but to hold it lightly, to not come with a demand that then I will know exactly what will happen, because we never do.
And in that sense, can you talk about matrescence, the idea that motherhood is its own developmental experience? Usually when you become a mother, when we talk about mothers, we're pretty exclusively focused on the mother-child relationship and the developing of the baby, the child. But the idea that motherhood is its own developmental experience, that the mother is going through changes just as a result of becoming a mother and going through motherhood. You talk a bit about the importance of that, what you see in treatment with women, how you help women understand that that is the case, and that is partially what they're grappling with.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect segue. And I just want to name that where matrescence comes from. The Dana Raphael really invented this term a few decades ago. And we have Aurelia Thon, who has brought this work into psychology and psychoanalysis. And really, so I encourage people to check out her work as well, understanding that, as you say, matrescence is its own developmental phase for mothers. And this involves wholesale transformations at a period in life like adolescence. And in matrescence, we see physiological changes happening, emotional changes, reevaluations of spiritual identifications of what relationships to keep, what relationships one needs, what are the roles of those relationships. Obviously, career transformations and values around a person's career. So at literally every level of a person's experience in matrescence, these things are being shifted. And so I think this is a perfect segue here when we're talking about what will always remain a mystery and what can't be controlled for. There's certainly a lot of preparation that women go through in preparing for birth and the perinatal period. But we have to hold that intention again with the fact that there will be disruptions and things will change in unpredictable ways. I mean, and one of the ways that many people talk about this is a plan to go back to work that gets reevaluated once a mother has had the child, has that experience of connection, and is saying, well, how does this work time-wise, and where is my mind? I'm preoccupied with the child. We talk about preoccupation and in a positive sense of like the focus or a fixation for a time on the child. So that may be one transition that some people choose that they didn't anticipate choosing. It might full well go the other direction because it's so overwhelming for some mothers. And they realize that when they have the discrete distinctions between this is when I'm on in caregiving and when I'm on with my child, that works more effectively because I have these distinct moments when I'm away and I'm able to socialize and I'm able to produce work with others. So I think that the message is really, this is also a gift, a developmental gift. And if we all have adolescence to harken back to and say how hellish it was, it's also a time of opportunity. And we wouldn't become adults if we didn't have adolescence. And that means to have agency and individuality and awareness about things that we weren't aware of before. And so that unknown is really an unknown to be welcomed.
I guess to be understood as such, meaning there isn't one right way to do it.
Yeah.
Right? It's finding your way that works for you. And that's always difficult against the societal backdrop of others denoting what is we've been living for, decades now, the mommy wars, women battling other women about whether your child needs you to stay home or that makes you a better mom if you're home, or it's better to be a working mom. and what that means for the home, what you bring to the home, what kind of a role model you are. There are these endless arguments about that. But at the end of the day, what that usually does is serve to make all the mommies feel
Right.
that they're struggling and that they're unsure, ambivalent, and feel that they're not measuring up in some way, in some ideal.
Yeah, I'd like to add something here. So, by way of example, again, we have so many families have been devastated with the fires in Los Angeles. And one of the things that I've seen there's many forms of mutual aid that are happening, but one of the forms I've seen is between mothers. So there are a lot of people who are organizing, pairing women, mothers who have children who are affected by the fires in Los Angeles with mothers who have clothes to donate or other things to give. And this is a fabulous intervention. And I saw a comment that for those of you who are signing up to do this, you are a good mother. And I think that by and large is probably meant to reinforce to every single mother that you have good in you and you're doing good and we support the good that you're doing. I appreciate this comment in a lot of ways. But I think that it also points to these aspects of ambivalence that can recreate dynamics of all of the pressure for caregiving, especially around ego distress and things that happen as a product of disasters, human and otherwise, that falls onto mothers again and again. And that it reproduces this sense of good and bad. And unintentionally, when we identify some mothers as good, that requires the negation that there must be some bad mothers somewhere.
Uh-huh.
And again, I don't think that's anyone's intention. I think, like you're saying, that's even part of the mommy wars. Of most things that hurt people, most don't come from malevolent intentions. They come from good intentions to say, well, I know what children need.
Well, you could say good intention, but I would argue that it's often an insecure position, right? It's struggling with those feelings and with that ambivalence and struggle of, I'm not sure I'm a good mom, but if I can find another group that I can denote as a bad mom, then in comparison, I am a good mom. And that it's a defense mechanism for the insecurity that most moms feel. And it's one way of managing that insecurity. Obviously, being able to help moms understand that A, that's probably not going to make you feel better. And B, it's getting to the root of that insecurity and normalizing that and understanding that for yourself, your own individual insecurity that is probably going to make you feel better. But that, you're right, but which is also not a malevolent thing to be doing.
Mm-hmm.
But as psychoanalysts, I think our ability to try to understand unconsciously what's going on, what is driving that, what is the person struggling with that they feel the need to set up that dyad or that opposition. I mean, these moms putting the call out to all help each other is nurturing each other, which I guess by definition is, some extended mothering and acknowledging that they need nurturing themselves. And that in that sense, that's a very positive defense mechanism against the terror that's going on. And the terror of, like, you can only imagine, you're in a fire. Can I protect my child? Can I protect my child from all this loss and all this devastation? And participating in something like that, you can imagine would feel very protective. Yes, I can.
Yeah. And I think that in several ways, it really goes back to this issue of triangulation or other relationships, of the need to depend on other mothers and to be dependable for those who are in need, and that those roles are shifting all of the time. At any given time, I could be someone who's dependent or dependable. And that's true of everyone in this equation. So that means there's not just the ones who are dependent or the ones who are dependable or good or bad.
Oh, such an important point. So you're making the point that it's important for moms to be able to feel there's still room for them to feel dependent at times and for them to seek nurturing for themselves in this big developmental move that they're making. And that if that's allowed or even expected, then being a mother is basically a whole lot less scary.
Absolutely. Right. And it goes straight to the issue of subjectivity, that if a mother is a subject, she also needs help, right? Even if it's just doing the dishes, but of course, it's also having someone to listen to and so many other things. Right. Mother's not omnipotent, is not the one who creates the entire world for their child. And so being able to do that is partly dependent on being able to need from other people too.
So let's move into how do mothers for whom the ideal may be, I am uber connected to my child in all things at all times. That's some ideal. But the other ideal is really, I need to grow a separate, independent person who's competent and can do things and is resilient. And those may seem at odds with each other. In fact, those sound at odds with each other completely. So how do moms resolve that paradox of being ideally connected, but ideally separated from their children?
Right. And I think this goes to a lot of the issues around separation as the means of individuation that we do see developmentally in children, that they grow from a state of complete dependency, even though they're influencing their mothers, the people around them from day one, they are completely dependent, to gradual stages of more autonomy and independence and individuality. But sometimes that has been taken to mean that, especially in psychoanalytic theories that have really denied the dependency or repudiated dependency and put that onto girls and mothers, that as if separation and individuation means a total cutting off from the mother. And so we have a tremendous amount of feminist psychoanalysts to thank for really understanding how development happens without denying the importance of the vulnerability, the dependency, the caregiving nature of mothers, and that connection to children, of course, are even more dependent and vulnerable than mothers. But that bond is something that unconsciously has been denied in some forms of an ideal of separation, that for an individual to be independent, they have to leave their vulnerability, they have to leave their related connection. And so, again, because we have a lot of this feminist theory to thank for understanding that dependency is also a function that continues throughout life, and vulnerability, that when children are separating and going off and doing their own thing, whether that's going to college or whether that's as toddlers and they're running across the field and they don't want to come back to you, or they're saying no all the time, or they're developing their own lines of thinking, any of it, that is not something that happens as a total break from connection and vulnerability, but that those things actually go hand in hand, that being able to individuate is to be able to differentiate. To have a differentiated identity means each person in a hetero family structure, father, mother, child, they're all differentiated individuals who can have relationships to each other. So I think that, yes, of course, that there are ideals on one side of the spectrum, that motherhood means to be ever present for everything that happens at school, everything that happens in a developmental milestone, to not miss a single experience and to be able to protect against every experience. And then, like you say, there are other ideals at the other side of the spectrum that really push for that separation. But we have ambivalence to think for the fact that it doesn't have to be one or the other. In fact, it actually, when there's connection and separation, that's when everybody functions the best.
It's interesting because I do think there's been this, starting with the discussion of helicopter parents and then snowplow parents and some generations or years of parents who are really feeling so compelled to be depended upon to the degree to which they smooth the way or take over or have trouble letting their kid, say, fall down, make a mistake because they're separate, learn the hard way, as it were, how they get through that, that I guess it's not all one way or another, that this mixture is so important of being able to have both going on, because a swing too far in either direction creates difficulty for that child. All independent separation, not being supported at all, the ending of this all important primary relationship as a supporter and as someone they can depend on emotionally and even physically, but also the other side of remaining quite dependent, maybe not even because that is what the child is choosing, but that's what's been modeled as what parenting is, that they will, you didn't get a good grade, I will call the dean of your college and discuss this, because, that we've created difficulties by, I think, not understanding societally how important the mix is.
Yes, right. And another thing I really want to add to this is about the other relationships, the extra maternal relationships. And that includes with another parent, that includes with grandparents, that especially includes with social policies and anything that's happening on the social level for a family too. Because what I see happening again is we have this move again towards trad wives, which isn't necessarily a pejorative term, but I see there's this move towards really wanting to show up for the needs of children and acknowledging that something has gone missed. Maybe we can say has gone wrong. And I think every cultural movement is an attempt to remedy something. But I want to be able to talk to what is going on here dynamically from a psychoanalytic perspective, because especially in the United States, where we have political policies that don't allow for much time, certainly paid time leave for parents, how hard it is to get childcare, reliable childcare, medical care, that these things are not dependable in an equal way for everyone in our country, for sure. But that there is a concern that happens in mothers in this connection and attachment to our children, that they need to be protected. They need to be cared for. They need to be held. And that it gets collapsed over and over again into this hyper nuclear family. We can say the nuclear family, but I think really over and over again into the mother and the child, as if the mother is omnipotent, as if the mother is able to protect against everything and know everything for the child. And that this probably comes out of a lot of regard and care for protecting the vulnerable in the child, protecting the vulnerable in oneself as a mother, that if all of that can be taken care of in this dyad, then things will be okay. But that misses the cultural surround and the family dynamics that are inevitably contributing to the forces that may not be protecting, that the child is vulnerable to in one way or another.
You're also taking away, I guess I could say, the role of a partner, of a father, of a grandparent, and that what you're saying, so the child may be missing out on those elements which are additive for a child to have a community, essentially, of caregivers and relationships. But also, doesn't it take away from those others in society who also want to be and benefit from being nurturers of the next generation, whatever the role may be?
Right. Many people who are childless by choice want to be involved in the bringing up of children, of their friends' children, of their siblings' children, but don't often know how, because there's not a lot of space to get in there. And I think that's right. There are a lot of people who want to be supportive too.
Do you find patients come to you with these sorts of issues known to them, or they present in some other way? And really, at the end of the day, this is what you come down to discussing.
Well, a couple of things. I think that a lot of women who are wanting to become mothers or who are new mothers do have some caution about coming into therapy generally, because there's still this residue of everything gets blamed on the mother. And I've found that that's one of the reasons it's really important to be, I'm a mother, I have experiences, to be a little bit upfront, not say a lot, but to be a little bit upfront about my own subjectivity too. Because I think that the people that I see and who've come to me, patients or otherwise, need to know that they're going to be related to as subjects by subjects, people who are people, and to kind of come down from this sense of judgment outside of experience. And in that way, a lot of people do know what they need. A lot of mothers do know that the matrescence, even before they had a name for it, that major things happened and that they're finding ways to put the pieces back together of their life and want help in doing so, but may not have had the language for that before.
Interestingly, even as a psychoanalyst, where I think we often think, well, we don't want to reveal of ourselves to patients. But in this case, you find it is important for people to feel that they can trust that you understand something of this experience yourself, that you've had some lived experience.
Exactly. Yes. And it's one of the things that has made me more of a relational psychoanalytic worker, because there's that need for, I see in the people that I work with, a need for a relationship of realness just to be at ease in the first place. But then the other side of your question is, do people not know that this is something that they want to work on? And I think that really speaks to the transgenerational piece of the work that often comes up with folks, is that this doesn't just apply to people who are in the perinatal period, the months and at the end of pregnancy and after giving birth in a very short period of time, but that how one is as a daughter, as a child of a mother, of grandmothers, these things are often coming up and showing up in ways that people didn't anticipate consciously in coming into the work. Sometimes that happens when a grandmother dies or there's another death in the family, of really having to reprocess what those relationships were, and new things come up. And because of where things tend to happen in the lifespan, often that's sandwiched in caregiving for young children too.
Such important topic. Hopefully, a lot of new moms will be listening, because I think it could be very helpful and interesting to think about through this psychoanalytic lens. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. It's been great to be here.